Ever get that feeling like you wish you could just download information straight into your brain?
Yeah, like in the Matrix.
Exactly. Like, imagine being able to learn a new language or skill overnight.
Oh man, that'd be incredible.
It would. While we're not quite there yet, the good news is there are some seriously cool techniques you can actually try to make information stick better.
That's what we're diving into today.
Absolutely. Practical memory boosting strategies that anyone can use.
And it all starts with understanding that memory isn't just one thing.
Right. It's not just a big filing cabinet in our heads.
It's more like three interconnected systems: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory.
Okay, let's break those down. So sensory memory is like that super fast, fleeting type, right?
Exactly. It's like a snapshot. Your senses capture everything, but it disappears almost instantly unless you really focus on it.
Which explains why I can never remember names when I first meet people. Like it goes in one ear and right out the other.
That's sensory memory in action, or inaction, I guess. It's just a fleeting impression.
So how do we get past those fleeting glimpses and actually move information into long-term memory, where it actually sticks?
Well, that's where short-term memory steps in. It's like your mental workspace. You hold information there briefly so you can work with it.
Okay, so it's like a temporary holding area.
Yeah, exactly. And from there, the goal is to get it into long-term memory. That's where it becomes more permanent, integrated into your understanding.
Making it part of our mental library, right?
Exactly. And one of the best ways to do that is through active recall.
So instead of just passively reading or listening, you're saying we need to actively challenge ourselves to remember the information.
Exactly. It's like instead of just looking at a map, you actually try navigating a city. The act of recalling forces your brain to work harder, strengthening those connections.
So it's like a mental workout, building those memory muscles.
Right. It's like use it or lose it.
I like that.
Yeah.
So what's something people can try right now to put active recall into practice?
Well, instead of just rereading your notes, try covering them up and explaining the information out loud, like you're teaching it to someone else.
Oh, I've done that before, and it's amazing how much more I remember when I force myself to actually retrieve the information.
Right. It's a game changer. And flashcards are great for this too. Question on one side, answer on the other, and quiz yourself.
It's like giving your brain those little pop quizzes. But even with active recall, how do we make those memories last even longer?
That's where spaced repetition comes in, and it's seriously powerful.
Okay, I've heard of spaced repetition, but explain it like I'm hearing it for the first time.
Think of it like strategically timing your reviews to fight against forgetting. Instead of cramming everything at once, you review at increasingly longer intervals.
Oh, I see. So let's say I'm trying to learn a new presentation. Instead of trying to memorize the whole thing in one go, I could review it later that day, then again a few days later, then a week later, and so on.
Exactly. You're basically giving your brain these little nudges to keep the information fresh.
Like reminding it, hey, remember this, it's important.
Yes, and you can customize it to fit what you're learning. There are even apps that use the forgetting curve to help you schedule your reviews.
Okay, that's super helpful. Now, let's talk about something that feels almost like a brain hack. Mnemonics, those clever memory tricks that can make tough information suddenly stick.
Mnemonics work because, well, our brains are wired to remember things that are unusual or vivid or have a strong emotion attached to them.
Yeah, it's like the weirder the better.
Exactly. So you're making it easier to remember by connecting it to something already memorable.
It's like needing to remember the order of the planets instead of just trying to memorize Mercury, Venus, Earth. You use that mnemonic, my very educated mother just served us noodles.
Classic. Each word's first letter stands for a planet in order.
It's silly, but it works. There's so many different types, acronyms, rhymes, visual images.
Right. And the key is to find what clicks for you and have fun with it.
I love that. And I have a challenge for everyone listening. Pick something you're struggling to remember and create your own WN mnemonic. The more outlandish, the better.
Make it ridiculous. Make it memorable.
Exactly. Now, speaking of making things memorable, let's talk about a technique that taps into our brain's love of images. Mind mapping.
Mind mapping. It's like turning your notes into a visual brainstorm. Instead of just having lines of text, you create a diagram with the central topic in the middle and branches for subtopics.
I love mind mapping because it just feels more creative and engaging.
It is, and it works because you're essentially creating a visual landscape of the information. Our brains are wired to process visual information way more easily than text.
It's like if you had to remember a list of words versus a vibrant image. Which would you recall more easily later?
Exactly. Mind maps tap into that visual power. Plus, you can add colors, images, little drawings even to make it even more visually appealing.
So if you're preparing for a big presentation, for instance, instead of just having bullet points, you could create a mind map with the main topic in the center and branches for each key point. Then add supporting details, examples, even little sketches.
Right. You'll be amazed how much easier it is to remember the flow and content when you have that visual map to refer to.
It's like turning your notes from black and white to full color.
Exactly. Now, even with all these awesome techniques, we can't forget about one crucial element: sleep.
Ah, sleep. The ultimate recharge button.
But it's so much more than that. It plays a huge role in consolidating memories, helping move information from short-term to long-term storage.
So all those times I pulled all-nighters before a test, I was actually doing myself a disservice.
You might think you're cramming in more information, but you're actually depriving your brain of the time it needs to process and solidify those memories.
So it's like you're stuffing more and more files into a drawer without giving it time to organize anything.
Perfect analogy. It's like overloading the system without giving it time to catch up. And here's a simple trick. Review material right before bed. That way it's fresh in your mind and your brain can work on it while you sleep.
Like giving your brain a bedtime story, but it's the information you want to remember. Now, speaking of setting ourselves up for success, let's talk about focus because, let's be honest, distractions are everywhere these days.
Ugh, tell me about it. In today's world of constant notifications and information overload, staying focused can feel like a superpower. But the good news is, focus is like a mental muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it becomes.
I like that. So how do we build those focus muscles? What are some practical things we can do?
One popular technique is the Pomodoro technique. You work in focused bursts of, say, 25 minutes, followed by a short break.
Oh, yeah, I've tried that. It's like tricking your brain into thinking, okay, just 25 minutes of focus, then I get a reward.
Exactly. And it helps prevent mental fatigue, too. And just as important is minimizing distractions. Silence your phone, close unnecessary tabs, find a quiet space if you can.
I used to think I was a master multitasker, but I learned the hard way. Our brains just aren't wired for it.
It's more like task switching, which just drains our mental energy and you end up doing lower quality work.
So even though it might feel slower, focusing on one task at a time actually leads to better results in the end.
Often, yes. So to recap, we've covered a lot. Active recall, spaced repetition, mnemonics, mind mapping, the power of sleep, and strategies for better focus.
And the amazing thing is that these techniques all work together synergistically.
They do. It's like building a whole toolkit for your brain.
And the best part is, these aren't just abstract concepts. They're things you can start trying right now.
Pick one that speaks to you and give it a go. You might be surprised at the difference even small changes can make.
I love that. So before we wrap up part 1 of our Memory Mastery deep dive, I have a little challenge for everyone.
Oh, I like challenges.
Pick one technique we talked about today and commit to trying it for a week.
See how it impacts your learning, your work, even your overall mental clarity.
Exactly. And we'll be back in part 2 to delve even deeper into how to apply these techniques to specific types of information and learning goals. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dives into memory mastery.
We've already explored some powerful techniques like active recall and spaced repetition, but now it's time to get even more practical and figure out how to make these strategies work for different kinds of learning.
Because we all know not all information is created equal, right?
Totally, like a historical date needs a different approach than, say, mastering a complex skill or wrapping your head around a super abstract concept.
Absolutely. So let's start with something I think a lot of people struggle with. Names.
Oh, names. I am the worst with names.
We have all been there, right? You meet someone new and their name just vanishes from your brain 2 seconds later.
It's like it never even entered. Poof, gone.
It can be so frustrating. But there's a little trick you can try. When you meet someone new, really focus on their face and repeat their name out loud.
Oh, like, hi, Sarah. It's great to meet you, Sarah.
Exactly. That repetition helps create a more immediate connection in your mind.
Got it. So you're kind of intentionally putting that name into your mental workspace.
Yeah. And to take it a step further, try associating their name with a visual image. Maybe Sarah has really bright blue eyes.
So you picture a sapphire or something.
Exactly. You're linking the name and a visual.
It's like you're giving your brain a little visual hook to hang on to.
That's using mnemonics to make a name more memorable. Our brains just love those connections and vivid imagery.
And speaking of mnemonics, they can be super helpful for remembering lists and sequences too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like when you need to remember a grocery list or the steps in a recipe or something.
Yeah, trying to keep it all straight in your head can be tough.
A recipe for disaster, you could say.
Haha, exactly. So instead of just relying on pure memorization, try a mnemonic device.
Okay, so like let's say my grocery list is milk, eggs, bread, and bananas.
Okay. Could you make up a silly sentence using the first letter of each item?
How about my enormous bunny eats bread?
Perfect. See? So much easier than just trying to remember 4 random items.
Way more fun too.
Yeah.
And this works for all kinds of lists, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Historical events, scientific classifications, the planets, anything.
Now, what about when you're trying to master a new skill? Something more hands-on.
For skills, it's all about deliberate practice combined with active recall.
Okay, so let's say I'm learning to play the piano.
All right, so instead of just playing through a piece over and over again, try breaking it down into smaller sections.
Some more chunks.
Yeah, exactly. Focus on each one really intently.
Practice, practice, practice those chunks.
And then, this is important, after each practice session, try recalling those steps or fingerings without looking at the music.
Oh, that's hard.
It is, but it forces your brain to work to retrieve the information. And that strengthens the memory and helps build muscle memory, too.
Makes sense. So you're building both brain and body memory at the same time.
And don't forget about spaced repetition here. Spread those practice sessions out over the week. Give your brain time to absorb and integrate those new skills.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about understanding complex concepts? Like really abstract ideas?
For those, mind mapping can be a game changer.
Because it's so visual.
Exactly. Instead of just highlighting stuff in a textbook, try creating a mind map of the concept.
Okay, so I'm visually representing the main idea, the key supporting points, and how they're all related.
Exactly. It's like a visual brainstorming session. And that makes it way easier to grasp the big picture and remember it later.
I can definitely see how that would be helpful for something really complex, like trying to understand a philosophical theory or something.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've covered names, lists, skills, and concepts. What about those times when you just need to remember specific facts and figures?
Like for an exam or a big presentation.
Exactly.
Mnemonics can be super helpful there.
Okay, so let's say I need to remember historical dates, like 1776, the Declaration of Independence.
All right, so try associating that date with a really vivid image or even a little story in your head, something memorable.
Okay, so I could picture a bunch of people in those powdered wigs having a wild tea party with 17 teacups on the table.
I like it.
And then, like, 76 fireworks going off in the background.
Yes, perfect. The more outlandish, the better.
So the key is to connect that abstract information, like a date, to something more concrete and engaging, something my brain can actually hold on to.
Exactly. And remember, practice makes perfect. The more you try out these techniques and figure out what works for you, the more confident you'll become.
It's like you're training your brain to remember things better.
Exactly. Building those memory muscles.
So before we move on to part 3, I have a little challenge for everyone listening.
Hit us with it.
Think about a specific piece of information you've been struggling to remember. It could be anything. A name, a date, a concept.
Anything at all.
Now try applying one of the techniques we talked about to make it stick.
See if you can come up with a mnemonic, visualize a mind map, even just try explaining it to someone else.
Exactly. And we'll be back in just a moment to explore even more powerful strategies for unlocking your memory's full potential in part 3. Welcome back to the final part of our memory mastery deep dive. We've covered so much ground already, but before we wrap things up, I want to explore a few more strategies that can really take your memory to the next level.
I'm excited to show these. So we've talked about how much our brains love connections and visuals.
You have, so let's dig into that even more.
Okay, so how can we use that knowledge to make information, especially if it's really complex or technical, just stick better?
Yeah, how do we make it stickier?
Well, there's this incredibly powerful technique. It's called the memory palace. Sometimes people call it the method of loci.
Memory palace, okay. I like the sound of that.
It's an ancient technique, actually. And what you do is you associate information with specific locations in a place you know really well, like your home.
Wait, so you're saying I can use my house to boost my memory? Okay, how does that work?
Imagine you need to memorize a presentation. Instead of just trying to cram those words in, you picture yourself walking through your house and mentally placing each key point in a specific location.
So like My intro could be at the front door, my first point's in the living room.
Exactly. The more vivid you make it, the better.
Okay, so if my second point was about, say, financial data, I could picture like a giant pile of money overflowing from my bathtub.
Perfect. You're creating these memorable associations.
So instead of just abstract information, I'm building this multisensory experience with location, visuals, emotions even.
And when you need to recall the information, you just take that mental walk through your memory palace, revisiting each location.
That's so cool. It's like my house is my own personal memory vault.
And you can use it for so many things. Speeches, lists, vocabulary facts, anything.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try that. It's like giving my brain a superpower. And speaking of superpowers, let's talk about something that can almost feel like memory magic. Music.
Music. Yeah, music has a really powerful impact on our brains. Triggers emotions, memories, even cognitive functions.
I've totally noticed that.
Yeah.
Certain songs just instantly take me back to a specific time and place.
Right. It creates these strong emotional connections, and those emotions can actually help form memories.
Think about song lyrics. We remember those so easily, even songs we haven't heard in years.
It's amazing. So how can we use this to learn new things?
Yeah, how can we harness that power?
Well, one way is to simply listen to music while you study. Classical music, nature sounds, instrumental stuff.
I've heard that Mozart makes you smarter. But seriously, I do find that certain music helps me concentrate.
It can definitely create a calming, focused environment, but you can also actively incorporate music into the learning itself.
Like how?
Say you're trying to memorize facts or vocabulary, try setting them to a tune, or make up a little song or rhyme.
Like a jingle for a tricky scientific formula.
Exactly. It's like turning it into a game. And music engages multiple parts of the brain, so it can make things way more memorable.
Okay, so we've talked about memory palaces and music, but there's one more element I want to bring in. Storytelling.
Storytelling. Humans have been using stories to pass on knowledge forever.
There's a reason for that, right?
Definitely. Stories are just so engaging and we remember them.
So how do we use that to actually improve our memory?
Think about it this way. Instead of just memorizing facts, weave those facts into a narrative. Create characters, settings, a plot that uses that information.
So if I need to remember historical events, I could create a story about them, almost like a historical novel in my head.
Exactly. Creating that story makes you engage with the information on a whole other level, adding those emotional connections.
So it's not just storing information, it's building an experience my brain can really connect to and recall later.
And you can rehearse that story, tell it to others, even write it down. Each time you're strengthening those memories.
Amazing. It's like turning learning into an adventure. So as we wrap up our memory mastery deep dive, I want to emphasize one key takeaway. These techniques aren't about cramming.
No, they're not.
It's about engaging with information in a way that makes it truly meaningful and memorable.
It's about understanding how your own brain works and finding what works best for you.
So experiment, have fun with it,
Yeah.
and never stop exploring the incredible potential of your own mind.
We'd love to hear about your experiences too.
Yeah. Let us know what you try and how it goes. We're always learning from our listeners. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing.